Hello and welcome to the FMCG Institute's Roundtable. I'm Kate Childs, and today we're going to be talking about how the pandemic has affected the FMCG industry internationally so far, and what some of the implications are for the medium and long term. With me, I have Marc Childs, Chairman of the FMCG Institute, and also Jim Flannery, Executive Director of the Institute in North America. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Kate. I'm just wondering, how are things in Barcelona? You've been locked down pretty severely for a long time.
Yeah, so as you're probably aware, we've had some of the strictest lockdown measures in the world. But they've started just this last week that people can go out and take a walk for exercise. So I got a haircut. A few things like that is now starting to come back around, but by no means are we back to normal.
Yeah. What about you, Jim? I think you're in Colorado, aren't you?
Yeah. Same thing here. We've been locked down, and last week it started loosening up a little bit. So restaurants and things like that are still totally shut down except for to go. But I did the same thing. They opened up the service industry, so immediately got my hair cut. My wife got the gray out. So it seemed to be a huge demand.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here at my house in the mountains outside of Sydney. I normally live in Andorra, as a matter of fact, but and I came here on a slightly extended business trip in mid-January, and I just haven't been able to leave. Yeah. Luckily, because of the length of this trip, my wife was with me. So she's here with me in this house. Otherwise, I'd be rattling around all on my own all this time. Anyway, so we've got some pretty important stuff to talk about. Kate?
Yeah, so I wanted to start by talking about the fact that many categories have been experiencing shortages, and we've seen an unprecedented amount of switching. So millions of households will have had positive experiences with new brands and also private label. What do you think this means for brand preferences in the future?
It's a complicated subject because we've got two competing forces happening right now. Yes, people have got lots of brands that they're not familiar with. And a lot of people, and I've heard anecdotes of this as well, that, you know, people have got a brand they've never used before and they say, you know, it's not bad. So I wouldn't be surprised if they add it to their repertoire. But at the same time, we've got this looming recession coming and all of the behaviors that are associated with that. So it's probably a little hard to judge right now. I think we always see during recessions that people start trading down and searching for alternatives and shopping for value. We're certainly going to see a lot of that in the future.
Yeah, I just, if I could add to that, I think this has been, you use the term unprecedented. That's a good description, right? And it's changed everything. It's changed the supply chain. It's changed consumers' behaviors. You know, consumers have moved from what I want to buy to what I can get. And that's worked in a number of ways. A lot of times the brands that they want weren't there, so they were able to try a parity brand, and oftentimes they were able to trade down to maybe a lower brand that the retail was able to get and fill. A lot of times they've traded up to a premium brand. So I think, you know, like it or not, there's been a tremendous amount of sampling that's taken place, and I think that will impact consumers' preferences down the road.
Yeah, with recessions looming, this is another time that private label tends to thrive. How important do you think that's going to be in the next period?
Yeah, so I don't know. Right, I think with a recession looming, people are going to wind up making a whole bunch of different choices. I think, you know, we'll probably get into the discussion about, you know, I haven't been to a restaurant in 2 months. You know, I'm actually saving a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm lowering my wine cellar, but I'm saving a ton of money. I think consumers are going to find different things that they've done, and they are going to be much more cost conscious. But that's all going to go into the mix, and I do believe private label is going to, like it was in the last recession, have more sampling. But I also think people are a little bit worn out, and they want a little bit of indulgence. They want a little bit of, I got to do this for me. So I think in the mix of things, the consumer products category is going to go through a tremendous amount of change, but I don't necessarily think it's all going to be in one direction.
Yeah,
Well,
we...
sorry, Kate, I
No,
would
go on.
also say that retailers have for many years been pushing and pushing and pushing private label. They've tried to expand into new categories. They keep on giving it better presence in their stores than it deserves, given its volumes, given its turnover rates. So we can expect that they'll be giving this another hard push, I'm sure. And what they would have seen during the period when there were shortages is what worked. They'd have seen what was left on shelf till the very end, and they'll have seen what was taken off quickly. You know, I had this conversation with one of the coffee manufacturers who said, well, our brand did great, but you could see some of the other secondary brands that just sat there on the shelf and people took private label instead. So, you know, I also think, by the way, that we're seeing research that people are going to do much more of a planned shop. And this is always so in a recession, that people are going to be worrying about value for their basket and trying to plan their shop so that they're getting as much bang for their buck as they can. And that's going to involve also a mix of private label so that they can afford those indulgences, I think.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I had some conversations not too long ago with some friends of mine at the Food Marketing Institute here in the U.S. And, you know, one of the things that they talk about is this, just a nomenclature shift from private label to private brands. And in the end, the quality and the performance of the product are what's going to count. And private label used to be, you know, I can give you a price, quality, or performance, pick any two. And they, on a performance or quality basis, were really not able to keep up with some of the national or branded products. That's just not true anymore. You know, most of the retailers have developed the scale that they can create their own manufacturing facilities or contract manufacturers and drive the quality and performance that complete. And in the end, I think that's, you know, it's going to be a branded product or an own brand, as opposed to just the term private label. And I think that own brand's quality and performance is still going to be important. Again, the trial thing is what's really changed in the last couple of months. I went to, I'll tell a couple of toilet paper stores because, you know, it's the butt end of the joke. But, you know, I went into the store the other day and it was, the aisles were empty, right? Makes no sense why they're empty. And then as they filled in, they started being filled in with brands that my retailer never carried before, right? So the retailer were into, okay, I can't get my assortment. Who's got toilet paper that I can use to fill the shelf? You know, some of that will stick, some of it won't.
Well, I think you make a good point as well, that, you know, they're not private label in the old-fashioned way. And I think shoppers themselves aren't necessarily aware that it's not a brand when they see it on shelf alongside some of the branded manufacturers. So I think from that point of view, from a shopper's point of view, if the quality's there, there's no reason not to buy it.
Right. I don't know if I know there's a Costco now in Australia, you know, obviously a huge retailer here. Kirkland is one of the most recognized brands in the US. It's an own brand. You know, it doesn't say Costco, it's a brand, it's Kirkland, they own it. And they put a tremendous amount of effort into performance and quality.
Jim, what do you think is going to happen with price deflation if we enter a period of really quite deep recession?
Yeah, I assume we'll see that, right? You know, in order for brands to survive, they need to be agile. They need to be able to meet the consumer's need when the consumer's pocketbook becomes tighter. You know, the brands that are able to provide that quality and performance at a price that the consumer is satisfied with, those are the brands that are going to thrive.
Yeah, I've been talking to some people here who feel that perhaps you won't see list prices declining, because you typically don't. But what we will see is deeper discounts and more often discounts and a lot more volume sold on deal. And when you couple that with the fact that people's repertoires are probably wider, I think we're going to see a very significant amount of price deflation of average selling price.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be an interesting journey coming out of this, right? So everybody's talking about a new norm, but it's not just going to be magically, here we are today with everything shut down, and then in 3 weeks we have a new norm, it's back to normal. As we're working our way out of this, to me, it's going to be really interesting to see, right now, in a capacity constrained environment where, you can't get all the product that you'd like, the promotion cycles in the U.S. retailers have basically changed, right? You can't run a buy one get one free if you can't get enough people to get the buy one. So as we're transitioning out of this to that new norm, it's just going to be really interesting to see how that EDLP versus high-low strategy plays out, right? And EDLP at least provides more predictability in demand. High-low is predictability, but we've all seen these surges, and if you can't supply the demand surge, then the low's going to be not as low as it was. So it'll be interesting to see how we come out at it. I do think it's going to impact the way retailers look at their pricing strategy down the road.
Yeah.
Look, I wanted to touch on a point you were speaking about earlier, Marc. In terms of the out of stocks in many categories that we've seen. And I think very clearly retailers will have noticed the brands that sat on the shelf the longest versus those that were out of stock. So what do you think, what influence do you think that's going to have on range and assortment in the future?
Yeah, well, of course, we've seen for years now retailers adopting aggressive range rationalization strategies. I hear of some retailers talking about cutting their range by 25%. It never seems to happen. We've talked before at our forums about cliffing. I don't know, Jim, is that a term you use in the US?
Say it again?
Cliffing. That's where a retailer will deliberately rotate across the brand owners in a category, pushing one to the cliff edge, and eventually, and really just using delisting as a strategy for forcing more investment and achieving better margins. The term originated in Tesco originally in the UK, but we see a lot of retailers doing this. They're using range rationalization as a tactic to bully manufacturers into providing better margins. It's one of the reasons why I think what we see is the logistics people, the operational people have objectives about business simplification and range rationalization. But when it comes to the buyers and category managers, they've got a different set of objectives. So they're using this range rationalization to manipulate margin levels, threatening delistings, and that's why it never seems to materialize. You'll see a retailer who says, our aim is to rationalize by 25%. Year after year, they might reduce it by 2 to 5% at best. I think that's actually going to change now. I think that they've seen the opportunity to rationalize.
Yeah, I know, I agree. But also, I think that's happening on both ends, right? So, my whole career has been as a manufacturer, and I knew the value of a flanker SKU, right? So you've got one flavor and you add another and you add another and you add another, and you can always describe, okay, but that flavor is really important to this segment of consumers. So you could build that story. Every time you launched a flanker, just the pipeline fill alone gave you a nice bump. Things drop off. I think what both ends of the value chain are learning in this experience is relearning the importance of power SKUs. A lot of the manufacturers that we've talked to, they were forced to, but I also think where they are today is they understand that it's just a better business decision to maybe temporarily suspend all these assorted flavors and just focus on the power SKUs because they're more profitable, that meet the majority of the consumer's needs. So I think we're going to see this this back and forth pull. It's the age-old challenge of, I need variety in order to meet the various consumer needs versus, to your point, the operations and frankly the finance people who want efficiency of the item. But I think this is going to open up that conversation like none other, and it's going to take a look at the reward systems, right? So a retailer pressuring something to seek more money to keep an SKU, the manufacturer throwing more SKUs out there, to broaden the amount of shelf space that they have and broaden the range, and that's all going to come under the microscope again.
Yeah, I see the potential for SKU rationalization. But isn't it true that many secondary brands deliver higher margins for retailers?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it depends, right? So if a secondary brand has a discernible performance difference, right? So this, I'm trying to think, I'm going to make this up. This, this detergent does this, but this flanker also has fabric softener or something in it. Those other range extensions that have different performance, I do think can generate increased margin for both parties. What I see a lot of is, how many different flavors of grape jelly can you have, or how many different flavors of coffee? I mean, the coffee aisle still astounds me and confuses me. Right? And those are basically the same thing with different varieties.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you said coffee and tea. I look at those sections and I think, I can't believe how many products are there. It's just crazy. But, a lot of retailers have got very smart using data to work out and evaluate substitutability. The difference this time is they saw it in real life, right across a whole lot of categories.
Yeah.
So I think they're awake up to that. But I agree with you. It's going to be mix and match. But it's going to be the same old story though that I started out with, which is the buyer is looking at his category, trying to, sort the best hand he's got to achieve the percent margin aims that he's aiming to achieve, at the same time as driving revenues. So I think there is still potential that manufacturers will use a fair bit of checkbook category management to keep SKUs in play that they want to by just writing a check.
Well, I mean, especially as we're coming out of this and into the new norm, right? So I think, as we're on that journey where we're moving from ship everything I can, which is limiting that variety, to, okay, we're moving to the new norm. I want to bring my variety back. That variety coming back is not going to be an easy journey. So I do think that's where, margin and negotiation discussions are going to come into play. I also think there's an interesting change that we may or may not see. It's going to, I know we're going to touch on some of the e-commerce environment, but I also think a lot of brands create variants to meet a consumer segment, right? Maybe a small consumer segment. Let's say that this is really important to 10 or 15% of the consumers. Well, then you take that item and you spread it over every store in the country, and there's not enough velocity in any one location to meet the needs, so that item disappears.
I've heard your story about your favorite macaroni and cheese. It was discontinued, but that would have sufficient volume if it was sold online.
Right. If it was all in one location, it would still be there. So I think as we're also going to see a dynamic change here in a bunch of categories, the way consumers are purchasing in an e-commerce environment, and that may provide manufacturers an alternate way of getting that unique consumer variety out there while still maintaining the margins and the effectiveness in the box stores.
Yeah.
Just to extend upon that, this pandemic has been traumatic for many and possibly causing a permanent change in the consumption and usage, including where people are shopping and how they consume out of home. Where do you think this is going to have the biggest impact?
Let me start with this. There are some very obvious categories where people's anxiety is being reflected in a significant spike in volumes. You know, Clorox must be laughing at the moment because hygiene, and probably Reckitt Benckiser and others who are producing hygiene-related products, home cleaning, hand cleaning, you know, personal hygiene, any of those things. It's hard to believe they're going to ever go back to where they were. There are a number of other categories where, because people are at home, in-home consumption has dramatically increased, and that, you know, you said earlier, Jim, this isn't going to just, we're not going to just throw the switch. This is going to be a long transition out of this, where people are nervous. They're not going to return to the same kind of interaction socially that they used to have for a long time. And so there'll be this long, slow transition where a lot more consumption at home is going to continue. People are having breakfast at home now. You know, they're not picking up a coffee and donut on the way to work. And, you know, that's probably going to persist for quite some time, I would think. So there are a number of very obvious categories where, you know, we can expect that the new normal is going to be elevated consumption for quite a long time to come. Who knows? I mean, nobody knows how long this crisis is going to continue. It could be a year before we're really seriously back to normal.
Yeah, I agree. I think some categories, frankly, have been recreated. The hand sanitizer category, the disinfectant categories. I think those are structural changes, right? Those are going to take consumptions of those categories and triple, quadruple them. I think those are real obvious. You know, it'll be interesting to see how the away from home consumption comes back or doesn't come back, right? So, you know, I know in our family, we're not going out to dinner at all, right? But we're finding ways to make that family meal a family meal again, right? So my son's here, you know, we're taking turns cooking, we're having fun, we're getting the cookbooks back. It's gonna fundamentally change what we do going down the road, and you know, I think that's good for people who are in the food industry. It's not so good if you're in the food service industry, right? So I think that's going to be tough. You know, we've seen some things like in China. Mark, remind me of the conversation we had, but almost a third of the restaurants didn't open, right? Even when they went back to normal. You know, so it's going to take a whack on the away from home consumption.
Well, just to take you up on that, you might remember way back that I owned a restaurant, just as sort of a side thing that I was doing. And I can tell you, these constraints where they say restaurants can open, but they can only have a third of their seats available, almost no restaurant can break even with a third of their seats full. So as long as that, and if you add to that the fact that people are nervous, did you see the research in the US where a study was done looking at how safe people felt in various shopping environments?
Right.
So they were most comfortable in supermarkets, and at the bottom of the list was malls, because they, you know, I guess they think there are lots of people in malls and it's an enclosed space, so I don't feel comfortable about going there. It's probably going to be a long time before people feel comfortable sitting in a restaurant too.
Yeah.
We also, just to compare or to reinforce that, in our forum in South Africa, talking to our clients there, they were drawing the comparison between two of the major pharmacy chains. One of them has small, tight stores, lots of them, and they've had a dramatic fall in sales. Their main competitor that has big, roomy stores, or by comparison, are doing much better. So, you know, people are worried about being in close confinement with others, and I think that's going to continue for a long time. But one thing I do want to take up, though, and get your thoughts on is one of the things that although food service may suffer for sit-in restaurants, what about quick service restaurants? We saw New Zealand open up recently to long queues for coffee and and hamburgers. I must say I wasn't longing for a McDonald's hamburger, with apologies to McDonald's, but apparently a lot of New Zealanders were.
Yeah, I just was talking to somebody the other day that has a fairly a large food service business, in addition to goods. And the way they describe this thing is their business through conventional supermarkets or grocery stores is going through the roof. They can ship everything they can get their hands on. To your point about safety, not so much of a surge in mass merchandisers or big box retails, and I think that's reflecting some of the consumers' feelings of safety in a grocery store versus some of these other environments. But then on the food service side, the to-go service is still available, so you can still go to a McDonald's or a Wendy's or a Kentucky Fried Chicken. These guys were saying that their businesses through that channel were only down about 10 or 15%. So it's not up, but it's not it's not zero. So I think that's still a viable alternative. The away, that's kind of, don't eat it away from home. Take it and bring it, eat it in your car or bring it home. I think that's that middle ground food service retailer.
Mm. And just I wanted to ask you guys about shopping patterns. We've seen a dramatic change in the way people are shopping, with a swing back to less frequent, bigger baskets and a surge in online sales. I know myself, I've been really just doing the weekly shop now, whereas before I would tend to go every couple of days for what I needed. Do you think any of these changes will become permanent? And what do you think that means for manufacturers?
Can I take that one first? I think you've got to break it down a little bit into what the changes are. So here in Australia, and I'd be interested if you're seeing this in the US, Jim, or Kate, if you're seeing it in Spain. We've seen that people are shopping at all times of the day now. So they're spread right across the day. They're also spread right across the weeks, because it's the days of the week, because they're not constrained by having to go to work every day. Now also, they're shopping less frequently, as Kate said, and they're buying bigger baskets, and we believe they're probably reducing their shopping repertoire. So they're not going to as many stores. They don't want to. They want to be in and out quickly and get everything that was on their list. So they've gone there with a planned list. Now, I do think that as people return to work and to normal life, things will tend to go back to the sort of time of day and day of week that we've been accustomed to in the past. I think that will change. I wonder, though, about store repertoire. What are your thoughts, Jim? And have you seen similar trends in the US?
Yeah, so there are two things that you mentioned there that I think are important. The governor of Colorado has been regularly saying, stop going to the grocery store every day, shop once every 2 weeks. And I think that there's this balance between consumption and purchasing, right? So we all have grown up. The closer we can get supply to consumption, the better off we'll all be. And now you've got people saying, well, in order to stay healthy, you want to stay out of these environments, so purchase every 2 weeks. I just, number one, I don't think that's natural, right? So people, building up their pantries, inventories, my home with the people we have here, it's pretty stocked right now. If I had to purchase enough for 2 weeks, there'd be no room. So I think that will gradually come back and match purchasing. The other thing about the basket size, and Mark, we talked about this in the call the other day. With the recession, with unemployment at all-time highs, with everything that people are going through now, you don't have enough cash to purchase everything you need for a 2-week period, right? So you're only getting paid once a week. When the U.S. stimulus checks went out, the group that was on the phone all talked about this spike in purchasing. So I don't think when we're out of this, we're going to see basket sizes maintain where they are today. I think they'll come back more toward historical. Whether or not consumers go to one outlets versus the multiple outlets, I think there'll be a lot that impact that. I think, what those outlets do to ensure their consumers that they're a safe environment, they will continue to be a safe environment. A lot of that is reputational, right? So I do think some of that is the size of the store. I do think some of that is probably the reputation and the consumer's impression of the integrity of that retailer. So I think that'll all impact the way consumers come back to more normal shopping patterns.
Well, let me just take up one particular point, and that is about pantries and eating at home, because these things kind of come together. You've got more food at home right now than you're used to. I certainly do. Kate, I imagine you do as well.
Yeah, I do.
Now that probably will decline, and probably people won't have quite as much. But you spent a lot of your career with Procter & Gamble that very famously coined the first and second moment of truth for shoppers. I have a suspicion there's now a third moment of truth, and that is when people are at home, they're deciding what to consume when. Now, to me, this is a fascinating subject. It's not a new one. But when you're thinking about, well, what do I have for breakfast now? Will I have bacon and eggs? Will I have some cereal? Will I have some fruit or sandwich? That is an impulse moment. That's a moment of truth when a consumer is making a decision about what they're going to consume. We heard from the global CEO of PepsiCo that they're believing that there are going to be many more snacking moments at home now. So I just wonder, how will companies come to terms with changing the story, changing the messaging to try and influence that impulse moment in the home now?
Yeah, so in my experience, that first moment of truth idea was all about the consumer's at a shelf, and she's looking at the product and she's saying, okay, which product am I going to buy? And so you win that shopping section. I mean, today we could go back to the conversation we just had about, the governor suggesting you shop once every 2 weeks. Planning, right? Planning and making those pre-decisions is it's a new built paradigm, I think. There's going to be a period of time where everybody's got to work with the consumer to burn off their inventory. I see some of that messaging, happening now. But I do think that gives an opportunity, and it's not just food; it's food, non-food. About what are you doing to plan how you and your family are going to eat and clean and take care of themselves for the next couple of months, and how can we as a brand help you do that planning?
Well, remember, sorry, Kate, in one of our forums, in our US forum, one of our clients made the comment, they're only going to clean their teeth at most 3 times a day. And my answer was, well, why?
Right.
That's another issue. I mean, I know it's a bit unrealistic, but it's an okay example. Why should we assume old paradigms like this when people are at home more? And I should also emphasize, and maybe we'll come to this conversation more fully later, but if, as we expect, people may never fully return to the office, that working from home will become a more significant norm in the future, then people will be at home more, regardless of how the pandemic ends or when it ends or how the whole thing plays out. People are going to be at home more. And so at-home consumption and influencing usage behavior at home is going to be higher on the priority list, I think, for the way companies market.
Yeah, I agree. Some categories, toothpaste may be one of them, diapers is another one. The child only goes to the bathroom so many times, so you're not going to do things to shift or to increase consumption. But I do think this away from home to in home is really going to change a lot. I know a lot of companies are working on their new predictive demand planning models to figure this out. So, I am drinking a lot more coffee in my home now because I'm not in my office, right? I'm not driving to the office. I'm not, the thing, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I may get the numbers wrong, but somewhere like about 20% of toilet paper is consumed out of the home. All right, so while you're in your office, that's all going to shift.
Yeah. Well, we had somebody on the same vein. We had somebody who's a pet food manufacturer, and I made the comment, or someone made the comment, well, of course, you're not going to feed your dog anymore, are you? And somebody piped up and said, well, yeah, I am feeding my dog while I'm at home.
Yeah, more treats.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think you have, an entire generation of people that have maybe never cooked at home, maybe never planned meals, that are suddenly doing that. And I'm seeing on Instagram pop up all the time friends, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, making their own sourdough bread. So I think there are some fundamental shifts, and maybe some people will discover things that they weren't doing in the past and they'll stick with it.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be an accelerator to one of the things that I think we've all seen over the last couple of years is companies moving from selling brands to selling solutions, right? So you don't just sell a box of pasta. What you sell is the meal and the meal occasion. You don't just sell a floor wax, or you sell a solution to keeping your house clean and hygiene and fresh. So I think now, with more people spending more time at home, still for a long time will probably be hesitant to go out. The more companies can take their brand equity and turn that into a solution for the consumer experience, the better off they'll be.
Okay, well, I want to switch gears a bit. And the business world has suddenly realized that many interactions that we've had in the past in person can be handled online. Sanofi's global CEO recently said that the day of the single meeting trip is over. So with the likelihood that office work won't return to normal for another 6 months or more, new habits are definitely going to be formed. What permanent changes do you think we can expect? Yeah,
travel for one is going to be have the brakes on for a long time. I think travel restrictions have been put in place before, and when we come out of those travel restrictions, it's take time, but travel's been at all-time high again, right? So I do think that there will be people leveraging technology like they've never, like this kind of conversation, the Zoom meetings, category reviews right now, whether you like it or not, they're all being done virtually, and they work. But I don't think it'll be an all-in change. I do think this is an industry that's built on trust and it's built on relationships, and I do think that there will be occasions, clearly fewer occasions than today, where buyers and sellers have to get together and sit down and talk and put the business on this side of the desk for a while and get to know each other as people.
Yeah, Jim, the main crunch point between manufacturer and retailer has always been the category review or the range review. And we've heard examples recently where what in the past might have been a half-day detailed deep dive into a category between two teams face-to-face has been handled in 2 hours. And what the manufacturers say is they've got to do a lot more preparation. They've got to kind of visualize the whole meeting and manage that meeting in advance very carefully. So a lot of pre-reads, a lot of very carefully prepared slides, and also the normal, because you can't just go on and on online like this, because it's hard work. It's actually harder to do meetings this way, I think, because the level of scrutiny of what's being said is much more under the microscope. So, but we've heard people say in multiple situations that they're now more productive than they used to be, that they're using the time more effectively. So, we've even heard examples of people, well, we heard recently of a sales conference with 150 people in it. that had breakout sessions and whiteboards and, you know, all of it done virtually.
Right.
We've seen training sessions run in a similar way with people all sitting in their homes. So, you know, I'm not saying that we'll forevermore not do those things again face to face. But the reality is, when we talk to companies about when will you return to the office, what they say to us is, well, you know, we'll follow government regulations for starters. We will return gradually. We'll probably have team A and team B. We'll have the office marked out so there's social distancing. And that could go on for several months. And I say, so how will you hold meetings when half the people aren't in the office? And they say, well, even when all the people are in the office, we may well still hold our meetings on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever, because for the foreseeable future, we won't sit together in one room. And let's face it, meeting rooms just aren't big enough for enough people when they're all social distancing. So it's hard to believe that if this continues over 6 months or 9 months, that we won't actually have some very new habits established.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot that's going to drive that to fruition, right? So, you know, it used to be you wouldn't have meetings like this where you could see people. I mean, every once in a while, you know, companies had these very special conference rooms where you could have a conversation like this. For the most part, a WebEx is, you know, somebody on the phone with a PowerPoint slide in front of you, and, you know, you don't know whether the people that you're talking to are listening to you or reading their mail. And I do think as technologies has evolved to make these, you know, the weekly calls that we've had with the FMCG Institute are really productive. I mean, people talk over each other. They're looking at who they're talking to. I think that is going to change a lot of habits. I think, you know, we are going to be heading into a recessionary environment where everybody's going to cut back on spending. I think travel is going to take a huge hit, and technology like we're using here today has to replace that, because you do need that conversation.
Well, how much further could that go? Do you think that could mean more flexibility for jobs in terms of locations, for example?
Yeah. I mean, so Zoom is not a new idea. Zoom is a technology that's come about because people have begun working at home. You know, to manage dual careers, to manage you know, having a career and a family. The ability to work from home has been going up and up and up and up to begin with, and the technology's been supporting it. I think, you know, this is kind of a breakthrough change. But yeah, no, I see a lot of permanence here. I just don't think it'll be, you know, all or nothing. I do think that when, you know, it's like the need to go to the coffee shop, right? You know, really, you don't need to go to the coffee shop, right? If you have the coffee in home, but that experience, you know, that little bit of normalcy is really important, and the ability to sit across the desk or in a room with, you know, with people that I've worked with for years. You know, it's buyer seller, but I still think we're friends. We're compatriots, right? We get together in the first thing. How's your family? How's everybody doing? That's important.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. It's going to be somewhere in between, I think. It's funny, I used to say, because I travel a lot, you know, in my job. I say to people, I spend half my life jet lagged, flying between hemispheres. And I used to say, I wish we reached the Star Trek era where we could teleport, and I could live in the Bahamas, and I could show up for a meeting in London and be home for dinner. You know, that would be great. Well, in a sense, that's what we're doing right now. That's what we're doing. I'm sitting here in my home in the Blue Mountains in Sydney, and there you are in Colorado, and Kate's in Barcelona. I mean, it's fantastic. We're having a conversation virtually as well as we could, you know, if we were all in the same room.
Yep. Hey, one thing I wanted to bring up, if I don't mean to shift gears here, but when we talked about the different habits, we really didn't talk about the impact of the change in e-commerce.
Yeah.
And I think for our conversation here, that's really important. I mean, I think one of the most dynamic shifts that we're going to deal with coming out of here is consumers have gotten used to purchasing online in ways they have never done before. As I've been working with companies, they're saying their online business, and they define it all differently, right? So, Hershey talks about fulfillment models for their online business. So there's fulfillment models through companies like Amazon, Pure Play. There's fulfillment models through a Walmart.com, and then there's the direct to consumer, and all those fulfillment models are up. Consumers are purchasing online either through an Amazon or direct from the consumer. And they're either going to like or not like that experience. And the more they like that experience, the more this shift from bricks and mortar to e-commerce is going to become more permanent.
Yeah, Jim, I know you're doing work with some clients there on the question of subscription relationships and how critical that is to maintain. And this basic question of, well, to what extent do we lose those people ever, if we lose them, because of their user experience rather than because of their experience with the brand? And I'll widen that out a little bit and say, we already know it's going to be very important with online to be on someone's pick list. So, right. But how much do we actually know about what it takes to get on a pick list, and what happens if you fall off it? Why?
Yeah, so I think companies have been continuing this learning about the e-commerce environment, right? So if you have a consumer that purchases online, let's call it via Amazon or Walmart.com or any of those networks, those are companies that consumers for the most part who have predetermined, yes, I'm going to buy this brand. So that first moment of truth changes a lot. They're not looking at the 42 brands and choosing it. They're in an environment, and in their mind, they've got the brand that they want to buy. Now, there are some ways in that environment that people can influence. So you can, have your brand pop up sooner or later. But for the most part, what I understand, forget for a second the shipping costs. Consumers that purchase online have higher average rings, or tend to be more loyal to the brand, and they're the kind of consumers you'd want. When you take that further step, and you get that consumer on a subscription, and this company that I've been working with prior to the COVID-19, they built their brand as an online brand. So they built it as a digitally native brand. And then over the last couple of years, they've expanded it into Target and Meijer and H-E-B and other. But they come at it from a very different mindset. And their golden consumer is a consumer that's on subscription, because they can predict it. They can actually ship it to the consumer much more economically than if the consumer gets on it today and is promised that they're going to get it tomorrow. And what I'm surprised at, with e-commerce sales triple, some companies are saying 10x, that what an opportune time to dig into the consumers that are purchasing your brands online for the first time, and to understand, do they like the experience? Are you creating loyalty? Are you creating the ability to lock that consumer in?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And I to a lesser degree, I think the same is true about getting onto a consumer's pick list and staying there. I just think that the more companies I talk to, a lot of them just don't really have an adequate handle on that question. What does it take? Because yes, you're essentially saying, and it's always been known in business, the consumers you have, the customers you have, are more profitable because it's easier to keep them than to get new ones.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of old tapes that we're playing, right? So how big will online be has always been, if your responsibility was the online business, then your story was, it may not be big now, but it's going to be big. You maybe didn't have the resources, you didn't have the focus to really do it. Well, it's big now. Hershey had their earnings report. 86% of consumers have purchased online in the last month. That's big, and there's a lot to be learned. The other paradigm that I hear is, when we talk online purchases or subscription, people say, well, my category won't work on Okay, so buying diapers online, that makes
Sorry.
sense. You can do subscription, you can do
We
that.
Sorry, my dog's barking.
But
Just maybe let's rewind a little bit. Sorry.
no, that's right. But no, actually, that's a good example, right? So when we were talking to folks, one company was talking about their biggest subscription customer is pet food,
Yeah.
right? And if you look at the largest florist in the U.S. is 1-800-flowers.com, right? So you want to, you know, I want the flower fresh. It's got to look good, and yet the largest florist is now digital. When we were talking about the subscription conversation the other day, and pet food said, "Hey, surprisingly, we do this," and some of the non-food guys jumped in. One of the companies sold vegetable juice. And said we were really surprised that our biggest subscription item is vegetable juice. So if companies can spend some time right now learning when their user base is larger than it's ever been before, and break down the paradigms about my business isn't meant for online or subscription, I think we're going to take a look at this consumer experience and have a whole different playing field coming out of it.
Yeah, agreed. And in fact, you'll remember that I posed that challenge to our participants in one of our forums online, just saying, you know, maybe you need to have a careful look at your business and ask yourself, you know, why is my business not suitable for subscription?
Right.
And I think they might find that you know, there are some positive answers to be found amongst that.
Right. Right.
Well, I think that's probably a good note to wrap up on. I think there's some really interesting stuff we've discussed today, and certainly more, I think, to discuss in the future.
Yeah, we'll say thanks to your dog, Kate, for giving us a moment of punctuation in the discussion.
Yeah,
so good to see you, Jim. Good to see you, Jim. I gather you've got some frigid weather coming from the north.
Yeah, it was below freezing here last night. It's you know, it's a funny time of year here. So we live in the mountains, and they call this mud season because, you know, we had over almost 400 inches of snow this year, and this time of year it all melts. But then at night it gets below freezing and everything freezes again. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and of course, Kate, you're heading into summer, so
sure am. Hope they open the beach. I hope they open the beaches. All right.
Well, good night from me. It's quite late where I am, so we'll catch up.
I'm going to grab another cup of coffee.
All right.
Thanks, Marc. Hey, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.